Hello and welcome to Legends of Runeterra, the League of Legends card game developed by Riot Games. Legends of Runeterra is a free-to-play card game and is quite easy to pick up, but hard to master. In this video, I'll be teaching you some of the basics on how to play Legends of Runeterra, what goes on during a game, the different game modes within Runeterra, and finally, I'll be covering some of the basics of deck construction. Let's jump right into it. To start off, let's talk about the different types of cards you'll see in Legends of Runeterra. Currently, there are two types of cards in the game, units and spells. It's important to note that every card in the game will have a mana cost located in the top left corner of the card, no matter what type of card it is. You'll need the corresponding amount of mana in order to play that card. Units are divided into followers and champions. Each unit has two stats, power on the bottom left and health on the bottom right. Power is how much damage a unit will deal either to another unit or to the enemy nexus. Likewise, health is how much damage a unit can take before it dies. Keep in mind, all damage that is dealt to units is permanent, unless you use a card or other effect that heals that unit, or your unit has the regeneration ability, which heals a unit to full health at the end of every round. A player can only have one copy of a champion in play on their side of the board at a time, except in the case of certain cards such as Thresh. If you draw another copy of a champion you have in play, it will transform into a spell corresponding to that champion. If you play that spell, you will shuffle a copy of that champion back in your deck, so you don't lose it forever. Spells are the other cards in the game. These simply just enact whatever effect is on the card when played, though there are some spells that do play a unit as part of their effect. There are three types of spells: slow spells, fast spells, and burst spells. Slow spells can only be played during your action. They can't be played at any other time. Fast spells can either be played during your action or during your opponent's action in response to a card they've played. Keep in mind, if you respond to your opponent's card during their action with a fast spell, then your opponent gets another action to respond to your fast spell with a fast spell of their own. This can continue until neither player has any fast spells left that they can play or want to play. Once this happens and both players pass, the spells will be cast in order from left to right. Burst spells are the fastest spells in the game. They work just like fast spells do, with one exception. The effects of a burst spell happen instantly, meaning your opponent doesn't get a chance to respond with their own spell like they can with fast spells. So if you play a burst spell during your action, you get a chance to play another card before your opponent gets a chance to play their card. So now that we have a basic idea of all the types of cards we'll see in Legends of Runeterra and how they work, how is a game of Runeterra played? Well, let's take a look at what happens during a typical game. At the beginning of every game, each player draws 4 cards from their deck. Each player can then choose which cards they want to replace. You can choose to replace just one card and keep the rest, choose 2 cards, 3 cards, or even all 4. The golden rule is to replace any cards that have a high mana cost since they're expensive to play and you won't be able to play them early in the game. But ultimately, this will depend on what type of deck you're playing, and as you gain more experience playing Runeterra, what type of deck your opponent is playing as well. The cards you replace will be shuffled back into your deck and you will draw new cards equal to the number of cards you chose to put back. At the beginning of every round, both players draw a card. Each round, players will either be the attacker or the defender. Who the attacker is for the round will always be highlighted with a sword icon for the attacker on the side of the board. This icon will indicate not only who the attacker is, but whether they've attacked or not, as the sword portion of the icon will go away once combat has been initiated by the attacker. Only the attacker gets to initiate an attack with their units. However, both players can play cards during every round. The attacker will have the first move during a round to play a card, at which point priority will pass to the defender, who will have a chance to respond by playing their own card. And this can be any card. You're not limited to just playing spells. You can play units as well, or even champions. If combat is initiated by the attacker, they'll place the units they want to attack with in the middle of the board. At this point in time, they can also play any fast or burst spells they have to help gain or maintain an advantage in combat. Once the attacker passes priority to the defender, it'll be their chance to place any of their own units onto the middle of the board to block the attacking units, as well as play fast or burst spells of their own. Each player can respond to the other player's spell by playing one of their own spells during this time. Once both players have had their chance to play the cards they want, combat ensues and damage is assessed. There is a limit to how many units you can have in play at once. You're allowed to have up to 6 units on your side of the board at a time. There's also a limit to how many cards you can hold in your hand. You can hold a maximum of 10 cards in hand at any time. Any additional cards you draw beyond 10 are discarded from your hand immediately. Each player's Nexus starts at 20 health. The way to win a game is by reducing the opponent's Nexus to 0 health. However, there are other ways to win a game of Legends of Runeterra. You also win if your opponent runs out of cards to draw from their deck before you do. Fiora, one of the champions in the Demacia region, allows you to immediately win the game if you can get her to kill 4 units. Don't play one game for too long though. If any game reaches round 40, it will end in a tie. I mentioned earlier about how there's a mana cost for playing our cards. So how do we pay for that cost? Well, mana is automatically generated in this game. Each player starts the game with 1 mana, and their mana increases by 1 each round. However, if you end a turn with any unused mana, that mana is transferred into what's called spell mana. This spell mana can only be used for casting spells and will always be used before your other mana anytime you play a spell. You can have a maximum of up to 10 regular mana and a maximum of 3 spell mana at a time. We can't finish talking about how a game of Runeterra is played without mentioning the Oracle's Eye. The Oracle's Eye is the blue icon on the left side of the board between your Nexus and your opponent's Nexus. You can tell because it actually looks like an eye. Sometimes a lot of cards get played from both sides at the same time, especially during combat. If you're ever unsure about how all the cards are going to play out in a situation, the Oracle's Eye lets you see how all the cards will resolve. It's very useful when there have been a lot of fast spells played from both players, or even if you want to see who ends up staying alive after damage is done and who doesn't. Random effects may not be accounted for, however. There are 3 different game modes in Legends of Runeterra. You can play a game versus another player, versus the AI, or you can play an expedition. Versus player and versus AI largely work the same way, so let's talk about those first. There are 2 different modes you can play against another player in: normal mode and ranked mode. In both modes, you use a deck that you've either already built yourself or any one of the pre-constructed decks that you earned by playing the tutorial. Normal games are unranked, so there's less at stake. It's a nice way of practicing a deck that you want to learn or that you built yourself against other players. Ranked games take you to the rank ladder, where you'll have the chance to climb up the ranks in a more competitive environment to see where you stand amongst other competitive players. Here, you will earn league points, or LP, for each game you win, and lose LP for each loss. Versus AI works just like versus player, but is a mode where you can take one of your decks and play against the AI if you don't want to play against another player. Expeditions work a little bit differently. Here, you don't use one of the decks in your collection to play. Instead, you need to draft a deck from select groups of cards the game gives you. Throughout this draft process, you'll be given a choice to pick from one of 3 different groups of cards. Each pick is divided into champion picks, where you choose the champions for your deck, along with a select group of cards that are packaged with them. Synergy picks, which are designed to complement the choices you made earlier for your deck. And wild picks, which allow you to add a different strategy to your deck. You'll repeat this process until your deck is built, and your final pick will actually be a trade, where you can choose to swap one card for another card the game offers you. Once your deck is built, you'll play against other players that have done the same thing you have, and your goal is to get to 7 wins. But if you lose 2 games in a row, your run ends. Don't fret if you get knocked out early. Every expedition is divided up into 2 trials. So if your first trial ends early, you can play another trial where you get to draft a different deck and try to get to 7 wins again. You don't get to keep the cards you draft, but you do earn prizes based on your best trial. And those prizes consist of cards that are added to your collection, as well as shards and wildcards that are also added to your account. Shards and wildcards can be used to craft any card you want in the game. Finally, let's touch on deck construction. Each deck consists of 40 cards, whether it's one of the decks you earned from the tutorial or a deck you decide to build yourself. Your deck can be any mix of spells, followers, and champions, but keep in mind you can only have a maximum of 6 champion cards in your deck. So choose carefully which champions you want to use in your deck. There are 7 regions currently in the game, with more to be added in the future, and you can combine up to 2 regions to use in the same deck. For every card you choose to add to your deck, you can have a maximum of up to 3 copies of that card. Earning cards for the decks you want to build is pretty easy, and something you'll naturally do over time as you play the game, no matter what mode you choose to play in. Legends of Runeterra is free to play, and is quite possibly the most generous card game in the market right now for players looking to invest time in the game, not money. But if you want to get a jump started on building your collection quickly, especially early on, check out the guide I've done covering just that. Link is in the top right corner of this video. This covers the basics of Legends of Runeterra. If this is your first card game, or even if you've come from other card games, I hope this video helped you as far as how the game is played, and will even help for those of you that are interested in watching Legends of Runeterra games as well. If you liked the video, feel free to give it a like below. If you don't want to miss out on any future content, subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you're guaranteed to never miss a video when it comes out. I also stream Legends of Runeterra live on Twitch, so feel free to follow me there as well. You'll find a link to the Twitch channel and all of my other social handles in the video description below. Thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this, and I'll see you all next time. Take care.